Hey there, creators! I hope y'all are doing well today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a fun take on the fleur-de-lis design. Typically, the fleur-de-lis have the traditional rounded petals, but I've gone with a more angular design by squaring off the petals. If you'd like to see how I did this, then come along and watch how I create these cute fleur-de-lis earrings with jasper beads. To get started, we need a few materials. First, we'll need some 20 gauge wire, 2 pieces cut at 10 centimeters each. You'll need some 20 gauge wire, 2 pieces cut at 4.5 centimeters each. We'll need 2 pieces of 20 gauge wire cut at 3 centimeters each. And we'll need some 24 gauge wire, 2 pieces cut at 4 centimeters each. You're also going to need a pair of looping pliers, a larger set of flathead pliers, and a smaller set of flathead pliers. The heads on these are both different sizes. We'll need a pair of chain nose pliers. We'll need a pair of round nose pliers. You'll need a pair of flush cutters, a chasing hammer, a bench block, a cup burr to round the ends of your wire, or a file will work. Oh, and I almost forgot, we need 2 of each of the 4mm and 6mm red jasper beads. This concludes the materials you'll need to create this project. If you need to hear or see this list again, you can either go back and rewatch this video, or you can check out the materials listed in the description below this video. Now let's get started on our creation. The first thing we'll need is some 20 gauge wire cut at 3 centimeters in length. We'll also need the pair of round nose pliers, and we're going to grab this wire right at the end. And then we're going to make a loop around the barrel of the round nose pliers until the end of that wire touches itself. And now we're going to reinsert those round nose pliers and pull the tail end of that wire straight down, and we're essentially making a head pin here. With my flat nose pliers, I'm going to straighten that head part of the pin out, and there you can see I've got a head pin. And now I'm going to take one of my 6mm red jasper beads and pop that right on the tail end of this wire, like so. Now I'm going to take this tail end of the wire and bend it down perpendicular to the loop below the bead, like so. Now, taking my flush cutters, I'm going to cut the tail end of this wire off, leaving a 1 centimeter tail, but I would recommend maybe even going to just leaving about 8mm at the end of this wire, because I end up having to cut some of that off. So here I'm grabbing the end of my wire and making a loop, and see, here you can see I've made my loop a little too far from that bead, so I'm going to flush cut about 2mm off the end of that wire. Grabbing my round nose pliers again, I'm going to grab the end of that wire and then finish that loop. And here you can see I've corrected my issue. So there you can also see that those loops are perpendicular to each other. You can see that right there. Next, I'm grabbing my round nose pliers and the 20 gauge wire cut at 10 centimeters. I'm going to place that wire flush in my round nose pliers and make a small loop at the end of this wire. I'm going to bring that wire all the way around to touch back on itself. And the reason you do that is it closes up that gap and make sure you have a nice tight loop, like so. Now I'm going to grab my bench block and my chasing hammer because I'm going to flatten this little loop out. You want to be careful just to do the loop. We want to keep the main part of the wire malleable and easy to bend. It's just easier to hammer that out now. Now I'm going to place my smaller flathead pliers on the wire so that there's about the size of a wire between the flathead pliers and that loop. And there you can see I've got a little mark on there so I can keep all of my little squares the same size. So, and then I'm bending that wire up, getting a nice sharp angle. And then I'm going to bend the wire again, getting another sharp angle. And then one more time to complete the square petal on this side. Making sure that's right up against. And then bend that wire down. And as you can see there, that side is a little bit rounded. So I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and press that wire up against the flathead pliers pretty good. And that helps kind of crisp up that corner. I'm going to bend this back out a bit. And now on the other side, I'm going to place my pliers again so that it lines up with that mark, but also so that there's a little space between the head of those pliers and the square. So you can see I'm adjusting there so to allow for the wire to come back through there. Now I'm bending that wire up at a nice sharp angle, and there's that space I talked about. Again, I'm going to grab right at the inside of that angle with my flathead pliers, right at the mark, as tight up against that corner as possible. And then I'm going to bend that wire again at that 90-degree angle. And then we're going to make our last bend for this square, lining it up with the mark on my pliers. And then I'm going to bend this wire up against those pliers again at a 90-degree angle. And there you can see how that wire just comes to the inside of that other square. And that's what we were trying to aim for. Now, grabbing my chain nose pliers, I'm going to place it up against the square with that tail end of the wire that it's up by there at the outside of that square. And that's going to create the bend for this larger petal or square or 90-degree angle. Y'all, I'm having a hard time today with words. Anyhow, we're going to grab the larger flathead pliers where I've already made a mark, and I'm going to show you how I made that mark or knew where to do that at. So I place my pliers on the inside like this, leaving the space for the wire. So right here, and then I'm going to measure the distance between those two parallel wires, which gives me 10 centimeters. So now I take my flathead pliers and I measure about 10 centimeters, and I'll mark a little mark on my pliers. That's how I got that mark. So now I'm going to line my wire up to that mark and make sure that those flathead pliers are tight into that angle, and then bend that wire at a nice 90-degree angle. Now notice that last angle I did not get 90 degrees yet. So here I'm adjusting that to get my 90-degree angle. And now I'm going to grab at the last angle, nice and tight, snug up against my pliers, and bend that last wire, or that last angle. And here you can see that wire lays on the inside of the upper little square. Now taking my flush cutters, I'm going to cut off the tail end of this wire right at the outside of that upper right smaller petal. So there you can see I've got my flush cutters right up against that, and I'm going to snip the end of that wire off. And then taking my smaller flathead pliers, I'm going to grab both of the wires that kind of cross over each other there. And I'm going to make sure that those flathead pliers are right up against the inside angles of both of those petals, and then bend this wire down, and making sure now that I get a nice sharp angle on that corner. I'm going to grab my round nose pliers, grab the tail end of this wire, and make a loop on the inside of this larger petal. This is a little bit difficult, but it can be done. You gotta make sure you hold on to that piece as you're doing it, and then make your adjustments at the end, and there is the completed fleur-de-lis element for these earrings. And you'll need to make 2 of these. So now I'm going to grab my bench block and my chasing hammer to flatten and work harden the piece. Now you want to be careful and just do gentle taps here. You don't want to smash the smithereens out of it. And you're doing just all of the petals. Be careful not to hammer the wires that cross over each other, or you can weaken that point. As a friendly reminder, if you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe. This just helps my channel to grow, and I sure would appreciate it. And here you can see how the piece looks after I've flattened it a little bit and work hardened it. Just picks up a nice little shine, and there's both pieces complete. Now that I've finished with the fleur-de-lis element as well as the first bead element, we now need to make our last bead element. Grabbing the 20 gauge wire that is cut at 4 centimeters, I'm going to grab the tail end of the wire with my round nose pliers and begin making a loop. I'm going to continue the loop to overlap and go slightly past the beginning of my loop, like so. And now I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and push the tail end of my wire into the center of that loop. Grabbing the side of my loop with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to push the tail end of that wire up straight from those loops, or perpendicular from the loop, like so. And there you can see the center. That's pretty well centered on that little loop. Now we're going to grab the 4 millimeter red jasper bead and pop that right on the end of this wire, like so. And then we're going to just make sure that the loop is pushed up against the bottom of that bead. We're going to take the top tail end of this wire and bend it down at a 90-degree angle. And then I'm going to place my round nose pliers up toward the top of the bead and start looping the wire around the barrel of my round nose pliers. And I'm also making sure that loop is centered on top of the bead. Once the wire crosses over itself, I'm going to grab my flathead pliers and grab the loop with those. This just ensures that loop's going to stay still while you start wrapping that tail end of the wire around that base wire. So I'm going to wrap around once, then 2 times. I'm going to bring it around to the back, like so. And at the back side, we're going to cut off the tail end of this wire, like so. Make sure you flush cut that. And then with the chain nose pliers, we're going to tuck in the tail end of that wire into the base of this area to complete our wraps. We don't want anything poking out to catch on anything. So here you can see I'm going to press that tail end down or burnish it down onto that base wire. And I slipped a little there, so I'm going to go ahead and grab again and push that in, and it's all in there. And there we've completed the smaller bead element. And you need to make one more of these cute little beads. And I have done this off camera. And there's my 2 beads. And now we're going to take our larger bead element and open a loop. One of the loops, we're going to bend that loop to the side, not pull it out. That will deform your loop. And then we're going to pop our fleur-de-lis element onto this bead. And then we're going to close that loop back up with the chain nose pliers, like so. And make sure your element is facing the right direction. And there you can see how cute that's starting to look. Now we're going to take the smaller loop with the chain nose pliers and again twist that loop out to the side. Never pull it down. And then we're going to pop our bead right onto that element. And here I'm going to bend that loop back into place. Like so. Sorry, I'm going off camera a little bit here, but there it is. It's so hard to stay in view. And here are the completed earrings without the ear wires. So obviously that's our next step. So now we're going to grab the 20 gauge wire cut at 4.5 centimeters. And there's 2 pieces here. And my looping pliers. I'm going to grab both wires at the same time on this 2mm barrel. And I'm going to make a loop. So here I'm getting those wires flush in those jaws, and then I'm going to wrap the wire around that 2mm barrel until those wires come back up and touch itself. And there you can see these match perfectly. And now we're going to take those loops that we just created and we're going to place them between the 7 and 9mm barrels of the looping pliers. With the loop facing the 7mm barrel, taking the tail end of those wires and wrapping it around the 9mm barrel. We're going to push the tail end all the way until there is a space between the loop and the tail ends of those wires, about 6 millimeters from the loop. Like so. And there you can see we're getting closer to finishing these up. So now I'm going to make sure that these are both even with each other. I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and grab in about 3 millimeters from the end of this wire. 2 to 3 millimeters is what you need. And then make a little bend, like so. And again, I'm out of shot. There we go. And there you can see, almost finished. Now I'm going to grab my cut burr and round off the ends of these wires that go in your ears. Nobody likes sharp pointed wires going into your ear holes. That does not feel good. We don't want bleeding ears. So we're going to round this wire off with our cut burr. You can also just use a file to do that. And make sure you do both. And there's the completed pair. And now I'm going to grab my earring and open that top loop up by bending it to the side, not pulling it straight out. And then put that piece onto the ear wire, making sure it's the right direction. And then we're going to twist this loop back into place. There we go. And there is our first earring. Isn't that fun? And now we're going to do the second one. Again, opening that loop to the side. And you can do it on your ear wire or that top bead. Notice I did it two separate ways, so you could do it whichever way you'd like. Making sure that piece is on there in the right direction. And now we're going to twist that loop back closed, like so. Now I kind of goofed a little bit here. Typically I hammer my ear wires before I place the earring element on the ear wire. But I'm going to do it after. It'd probably be best to do this before you put that on there. So here I'm going to hammer the outside front edge of my ear wire. And I'm just gently tapping it to create a little flat surface for the light to catch on. And it just gives it a little extra shine there. And so I've started there, and now I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side, just to kind of pull it out a little bit more. And there you can see that little bit of a shine there. And now we're going to do the same thing for the other side. And here are the completed earrings. So what do you guys think of my little version of the fleur-de-lis? Making it squared instead of rounded. I'd sure love to hear your comments. Also, just so y'all know, I have now membership for my channel and for my fans. So if you'd like to become a member, just go to my channel page and click join, and you can see the different things that you could get from being a member and part of this community. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you a little bit more. If you enjoyed watching this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. That sure helps me out and keeps this channel growing. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next Thursday.